Title: The Hollow Man. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The town of Black Hollow was a place forgotten by time. Nestled deep within the dense, ancient woods, it was a place where the sun rarely pierced through the thick canopy of trees, casting the town in a perpetual twilight. The air was always damp, the ground perpetually muddy, and the townsfolk spoke in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the silence that hung over the place like a shroud. It was to this town that Daniel Harper arrived, a young journalist with a penchant for uncovering the darkest secrets. He had heard rumors of Black Hollow, whispers of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. It was the perfect subject for his next investigative piece, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how dark it might be. The journey to Black Hollow was long and arduous. The roads were narrow and winding, the trees pressing in on either side, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The further he drove, the more the sense of unease grew. The woods seemed alive, watching him, waiting for him. When he finally arrived, the town was just as he had imagined, dark, dreary, and eerily quiet. The buildings were old and weathered, their paint peeling and windows cracked. The streets were empty, save for a few stray cats that darted into the shadows as he passed. He parked his car in front of the only inn in town, a dilapidated building with a flickering neon sign that read Black Hollow Inn. The door creaked open as he pushed it, revealing a dimly lit lobby with worn-out furniture and a musty smell. The innkeeper, an elderly man with a hunched back and a face lined with deep wrinkles, greeted him with a nod. "Room for one," Daniel said, setting his bag on the counter. The innkeeper eyed him suspiciously but said nothing as he handed over a key. "Room 13 at the end of the hall," he said, his voice raspy and low. Daniel took the key and made his way to his room, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a rickety chair, and a cracked mirror on the wall. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the window was covered with a heavy curtain that blocked out what little light there was. He set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. He had a feeling that Black Hollow held more secrets than he could imagine, and he was determined to uncover them. Chapter 2. The Town's Dark Secret. The next morning, Daniel set out to explore the town. The streets were still empty, the only sound the occasional caw of a crow perched on a rooftop. He walked past the old church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side, and the general store, its windows boarded up. As he wandered, he noticed that the townsfolk avoided him, their eyes darting away as soon as he made eye contact. It was as if they were afraid of him, or perhaps afraid of what he might discover. He finally found someone willing to talk, a young woman named Sarah who worked at the local diner. She was hesitant at first, but after some coaxing, she agreed to tell him what she knew. "Black Hollow has always been a strange place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But things got worse about a year ago. People started disappearing, first just a few, then more and more. No one knows where they go, but they're never seen again." Daniel's interest was piqued. "Do you have any idea what's causing it?" Sarah shook her head. "No one knows for sure, but there are rumors. Some say it's the woods, that they're cursed. Others say it's something else, something unnatural." Daniel pressed her for more information, but she clammed up, her eyes darting nervously around the diner. He thanked her and left, his mind racing. He needed to find out more. He spent the next few days talking to the townsfolk, piecing together the story of Black Hollow. The disappearances had started about a year ago, and since then, over a dozen people had vanished without a trace. The townsfolk were terrified, but they refused to leave, as if bound to the town by some unseen force. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that there was something sinister at work in Black Hollow. He just needed to find out what it was. Chapter 3. The Hollow Man. One night, as Daniel was walking back to the inn, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a low, guttural growl coming from the woods. He turned towards the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting and writhing like living things. He saw something move in the shadows, a figure that seemed to blend into the darkness. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs and a face that was nothing but a hollow void. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the ground without making a sound. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure stopped and turned towards him, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. He felt a cold, creeping dread wash over him, as if the very essence of fear had taken physical form. The figure raised a hand, pointing towards the woods, and then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Daniel stood there for a moment, his mind reeling. He had seen something that defied explanation. He knew then that the disappearances were connected to the figure, to the Hollow Man. He returned to the inn, his mind racing. He needed to find out more about the Hollow Man, to uncover the truth behind the disappearances. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. The townsfolk were terrified, and the woods were dangerous. But he had no choice. He had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 4, The Ritual. Daniel spent the next few days researching the history of Black Hollow, scouring old records, and talking to the few townsfolk who were willing to speak to him. What he found was a story that sent chills down his spine. The town had been founded over a century ago by a group of settlers who had stumbled upon the woods. They had built their homes and started a new life, but soon, strange things began to happen. People would hear whispers in the woods, see shadows moving on their own, and some even claimed to have seen the Hollow Man. The settlers had tried to leave, but the woods wouldn't let them. They were trapped, bound to the town by some unseen force. Over the years, the disappearances started and the townsfolk became more and more terrified. Daniel realized that the Hollow Man was not just a legend, it was real, and it was the cause of the disappearances. He needed to find a way to stop it, to free the town from its grip. He found a clue in an old book he discovered in the town's library. It was a journal written by one of the original settlers detailing a ritual that could banish the Hollow Man. The ritual was complex and dangerous, requiring a sacrifice, a life for a life. Daniel knew what he had to do. He needed to perform the ritual to banish the Hollow Man once and for all. But it would require a sacrifice, a life for a life. He thought about the townsfolk, about the fear in their eyes, and he knew he couldn't let the Hollow Man continue to prey on them. He spent the next few days preparing. He gathered the necessary ingredients, candles, herbs, a ceremonial dagger, and studied the ritual until he had it memorized. He knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't let the Hollow Man continue to haunt the town. He returned to the woods on a stormy night, the rain falling in sheets. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting and writhing like living things. He set up the ritual in a clearing, arranging the candles in a circle and placing the herbs in the center. He lit the candles, the flames flickering in the darkness. He began to chant the words of the ritual, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. The air grew heavy and he could feel the Hollow Man's presence, its anger, its desperation. As he reached the final words of the ritual, he picked up the ceremonial dagger. His hands trembled as he held it to his palm, the blade glinting in the candlelight. He took a deep breath and made the cut, his blood dripping onto the herbs. The clearing exploded in a burst of light and he felt a wave of energy wash over him. The Hollow Man appeared before him, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. It let out a guttural roar, its form twisting and writhing as it was pulled into the void. The ritual had worked. The Hollow Man was gone. Chapter 5, The Aftermath. Daniel woke up in the hospital, his body weak and his mind foggy. He had no memory of how he had gotten there, but he could still feel the weight of the ritual, the sacrifice he had made. The doctors told him he had been found unconscious in the woods, his palm cut and his body weak from blood loss. They had no explanation for how he had gotten there or what had happened, but they were just glad he was alive. Daniel knew the truth, but he kept it to himself. He had done what needed to be done, and the town was finally at peace. The Hollow Man was gone, banished by the ritual, and the disappearances had stopped. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. He had sacrificed a part of himself to complete the ritual, and he could feel the Hollow Man's presence lingering in the back of his mind, a shadow that refused to fade. He returned to Black Hollow one last time, just to make sure. The town looked different somehow, less foreboding. The streets were no longer empty, and the townsfolk seemed less afraid. But as he walked through the town, he noticed something strange. The shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting and twisting in the corners of his vision. He tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself it was just his imagination, but the unease grew with every step he took. As he left the town, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. But when he turned around, there was no one there. He drove away from Black Hollow, his heart heavy but his mind at peace. He had done what needed to be done, and the town was finally free. But he knew the shadows would always be with him, a reminder of the price he had paid. Epilogue. The town of Black Hollow was never the same after Daniel left. The disappearances stopped, and the townsfolk began to rebuild their lives. But the woods remained dark and foreboding, and the whispers never truly went away. Daniel returned to his life as a journalist, but he was never the same. The experience had changed him, leaving a mark on his soul that would never fade. He could still feel the Hollow Man's presence, a shadow that lingered in the back of his mind. He tried to move on, to forget about Black Hollow, but the memories haunted him. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the whispers echoing in his ears. He knew the Hollow Man was gone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting, biding its time until it could rise again. And as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't help but wonder if the shadows would ever truly leave him, or if they would always be a part of him, a reminder of the price he had paid. The end.